Huh. You know, normally you get into computer programming to avoid manual labor. In today's humble opinion, we're removing the pro from programming in TIS-100. TIS-100 is a computer programming simulation game developed and published by Zachtronics, the same developer and publisher that brought us the fantastic Infinifactory. And let me tell you, Bethany has really outdone herself this time. From my basic understanding of acronyms and video game culture, I can only assume that TIS stands for the Information Technology Scrolls, but censored so it doesn't spell out tits. Which is a shame because honestly, this game would have been a perfect A-cup. Not much to look at, but pretty fun to play with, all things considered. Joking aside, TIS stands for Tessellated Intelligence System, which is just a fancy way of saying fictional computer doohickey. The story goes that your Uncle Randy brought this weird, malfunctioning computer home from a yard sale and tinkered around with it for a while before his untimely demise, so you decided that you were going to finish his legacy and figure out just what the hell the TIS-100 actually is. And you do this by solving puzzles, all of which are presented in the form of a task issued by the TIS-100 that requires you to take information from an input and convert it into a specific kind of output, or sometimes series of outputs. Honestly, it's complicated and I don't fully understand it myself, mostly because it requires you to learn and understand a fictional computing language to a certain degree of competency, and then learn and understand the rules of the TIS-100 itself, and then also write your own code while pausing to consider the timing and flow of the information to be sure that it's going where you want it, when you want it there. On top of all that noise, you've also got limited space to work with depending on the layout of the nodes, where some are dysfunctional and others have special attributes, but The big question that was on my mind, and apparently the mind of many others, is whether or not the game can actually teach you to program. The answer has been a resounding no. The first reason given is that the language itself is fictional, and because of the sheer diversity of programming languages, it has no actual applicable usage. Another little detail that shit all over my dreams of being the world's best computer programmer is that the language is remarkably basic, even when compared to basic programming languages. Granted, that means that it's actually harder to work with in some cases because there's not a lot of flexibility, but it also means that I'm struggling to comprehend even the most basic programming language in existence. Then, believe it or not, they said that the game is actually way more visual than programming actually is most of the time, so the game is through and through just a minimalistic puzzle game. But don't worry, because the bright side is that it's apparently excellent for putting you in the programming mindset, which I can definitely see. The format of the puzzle, which is to say presenting you an input and requiring a certain output with an open-ended path between, and working with a simplified language as your toolkit, forces you to think in the way that programmers do. Manipulating data in order to get the sort of behavior that you want is at its core what programming usually is, at least I think. I'm not actually a programmer, I don't know if you can tell that or not. But basically what I'm trying to get at is that TIS-100 is essentially Infinifactory role-playing as a malfunctioning computer. I would say that it's honestly a step up in terms of difficulty just because of how esoteric the nature of its presentation is. Where in Infinifactory the pieces visually represented a particular behavior, TIS-100's pieces are tags that you type and their effects are not so readily seen, so it just takes a lot more time and effort to learn. You can usually find TIS-100 on the Steam store for the reasonable price of $6.99. It's very tempting to fall into the illusion that the game doesn't look particularly fancy, so it should be as cheap as humanly possible, but I honestly think that's a fair price when you take into consideration that Daryl programmed a fake computer program and developed puzzles around it. That's a pretty impressive feat. Still, the normal person in me scoffs and pedantically says that $5 would be much more fair, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw that out there. But I'm also the kind of person that buys 5 of something if it's 5 for $5 instead of just getting 1 for $1, so I mean, take that into consideration. The lowest that it's ever been is $3.49, at which point I'd say that if it interests you, you should definitely go for it. Gameplay for TIS-100 earns a 9 out of 10 because it pretty much perfectly captures the game that it sets out to create. As far as I can tell, the logic of the system is never flawed, and therefore the mechanics are entirely on point. Everything that you type, as long as it's correct, will yield a correct result according to your programming. If you're wrong, it's on you. That being said, the last point is because I feel like when it comes to approaching it, things are a little more obtuse. The manual, which is supposed to teach you how to use the system, is worded in what I can only assume is an intentionally convoluted way, probably to give that authentic 80s stereotypical computer geek feel. The downside is that in doing so, it makes the game less approachable and harder to learn in a way that I would argue is needless. Value for TIS-100 takes a hit and weighs in at a 7 out of 10, not because it's a bad game, mind you, but because I feel like it only has appeal for certain types of people. Regardless of whether or not you like a good puzzle game, the presentation of TIS-100 is for a much smaller subgroup of people interested in programming, even if it is just the aesthetic. Now, I might be completely wrong in the assessment here, but that doesn't seem like it fits the overall general audience sort of bundle. Granted, it does provide a unique experience that I specifically enjoyed, but how many potential customers enjoy puzzle games in which the entirety of the game is based on straight up puzzles? And then of that subgroup, how many of them would look at TIS-100 and not feel intimidated intimidated by the monolithic black screen and white text, especially with an intentionally vague and confusing manual and the misconception that you have to understand programming to enjoy it. With a composite score of 8, TIS-100 earns a B+. It's a fantastic puzzle game that probably deserves better, but will probably also be overlooked and undervalued because of its cover.